Okay, I've restarted. hopefully, hopefully you can hear me and there are no audio problems. If you're watching this and you hear if there's some kind of problem, you can't hear me, please let me know if something is wrong. I hope it's okay. Okay, so today we are going to. I'll just keep reading unless somebody tells me something different, something is wrong. We're going to start volume 2 of Cambridge Ancient History. It's a very enormous work of information, so it should be very detailed. And this will not be like a typical audiobook where I just read it. We're going to, if there are fancy words, we're going to look up the fancy words, or sometimes we'll look for pictures of the things that we encounter, the interesting things that we encounter, so we can better understand them. And my principal channel is teaching English. So kind of my goal of this is to read a few sentences and then maybe summarize it in very simple terms. So even if you're learning English, it's not your first language, I will explain things in a very simple way, which, number one, it's for selfish reasons, then I can really understand what I'm reading, I hope. But also, if the words, sometimes the language and the sentences are very complicated. And this will help us to clarify sometimes what people are saying. So I think it's a good way of really learning the ancient history. This is chapter 1, which is titled The Peoples of Asia Minor. Now, if you're watching this live with me, then I encourage you, if there's something you don't understand or you have a question or you want to see a picture of something, just let me know in the comments, and if I see it, I will be happy to explore it with you. We can look at pictures or define things. That's the whole point of this, so I really encourage you to make questions or comments in the comments section. All right, so let's get started with chapter 1, The Peoples of Asia Minor. In the period upon which we are about to enter, the peoples of the Southwest Asia, Egypt, and Southeast Europe were brought into very close contact with one another. Peaceful trading journeys, ambitious wars by land and by sea, and some sweeping ethnical movements. I wonder what that is, an ethnical movement. But what they're saying is that the people of Southwest Asia, what do they consider? We know what Southeast Asia is. That's like Vietnam and Cambodia and possibly India. Let's see. Google Earth. I'm just going to look on a map. Southwest Asia. What would that even be? I'm just going to open up Google Earth here. So let's see. I guess maybe well, I would know this as maybe like Afghanistan. Afghanistan, perhaps Kyrgyzstan or Iran. Okay, well, let's see. Let's check the official definition of Southwest Asia. Let's see. Instead of guessing, why not? Get the definition. Southwest Asia. Maybe they don't talk about that very much anymore because they don't seem to reference it in Google. They have the Middle East. Maybe they mean the Middle East. Maybe that's what we mean now, because I don't even see an answer for Southwest Asia. I see Southwest Asia, Sinai Peninsula. Okay, yeah, it's like the Middle East. Okay. I never thought of that as Asia. Well, let's see. Go back to the book. All right. So people from What do we have? We've got Egypt, Southeast Europe, and Southwest Asia. So the Middle East, Egypt, and parts of Europe were brought into very close contact with one another. Peaceful trading journeys, ambitious wars by land and by sea, and some sweeping ethnic movements. So maybe that means that they were sharing cultures, or there was a lot of exchange of certain cultures in that region, which had the profoundest consequences for history, made the area virtually one interconnected whole. A profound means deep or serious or extreme. So deep consequences, extreme consequences for history, and made the area virtually one interconnected whole. So this whole area of around the Middle East, I guess around the Mediterranean, like Greece, Turkey, Egypt, Syria, they had a lot in common. I think that's what it's saying here. They shared quite a bit. Okay, the history of no portion of this whole can properly be viewed quite apart from the rest, although naturally it will be necessary to treat each part by itself and with reference to its own peculiar development and problems. The available sources, moreover, although by no means inconsiderable in quantity, vary greatly as regards quality, both the archaeological and the written materials are interpretations and may be treated from different points of view. Further, far-reaching political and other changes which mark this period can be best understood by only taking a wider survey of the interrelations between Asia, Africa, and Europe, which will illumine the particular vicissitudes now to be described. All right, so they're saying there is a lot of material to base this information on. However, it seems like the material is either incomplete or it requires a lot of interpretation. So it's hard to say how accurate this information or the interpretations are, or how they're viewing this particular time in history. So let's look up this word, vicissitudes. I can't even spell it. Where is it? Where did it go? Wait. Vicissitudes. What is a vicissitude? A change of circumstance or fortune, typically one that is unwelcome or unpleasant. All right, let's go back and see how they used vicissitude here. Far-reaching and other changes which mark this period can best be understood only by taking survey of the interrelations between Asia, Africa, and Europe, which illumine, that means give light, or maybe show us or help us understand, the particular vicissitudes. So wait, let's check that definition again. Vicissitude is a change of circumstance or fortune, typically one that is unwelcome or unpleasant. So, which will help us understand these serious changes that happened, sometimes tragedies, bad things that happened. Accordingly, the chapters in this volume are drawn up so as to assist the reader to grasp the period and the area as a whole, and also in their various parts and aspects, though at an unavoidable cost of some repetition and overlapping. Overlapping is when two things go on top of each other. So two things meet, but then they also intersect, and it's hard to see which one is which. So they're warning us in the beginning that we are going to have to repeat some information because certain histories overlap, they intersect, they cross each other, and sometimes we have to repeat the same history, talking about different groups. Once more, see Volume 1, page 181. The history of Egypt holds the premier position, owing mainly to its relations with Southwest Asia and the peoples of the East Mediterranean. But Asia Minor now assumes a unique significance, partly because, as the bridge between Europe and Asia, it was the center of the most intricate developments of the period. And if you don't know the word intricate, that means very complicated or very detailed. So Asia Minor, which I think is Turkey, isn't it? Let's just make sure. I think it is. Yeah. It's like the area around Turkey. What is Asia Minor now called? Anatolia. But, I mean, it's mostly in Turkey. Okay, let's see. So they're saying that Asia Minor, this area, the area around Turkey, was extremely important at this time. Very, very important in all kinds of ways. It was the center of the most intricate developments of the period, and partly also because of the rich store of cuneiform tablets discovered at Bogaz Koi and the problems of the Hittites and all of their ramifications, and proving to be of more fundamental importance than could ever have been suspected. Accordingly, chapters on the peoples of Asia Minor and of Europe form an appropriate introduction and deal with the linguistic problems and with certain important migrations. Okay, let's see. Just trying to center this better. Sorry, I haven't done this in a while, so I'm a little bit clumsy. Okay. General physical conditions of Asia Minor. This is part 1 of chapter 1, the peoples of Asia Minor. It is still too early to claim that the history of the peoples of Asia Minor may be written with certainty. Rarely crossed by European travelers since the Turkish conquest till the 19th century, and still more rarely by scholars desirous to learn its distant past and competent to judge of what they saw. It may be said that Asia Minor was first revealed to the world by the French traveler Texier, and by the British geologist W.J. Hamilton, who started on his memorable expedition in 1835. Since then, French, German, and English scholars have been diligent in the study of its geographical features and of its antiquities. But the excavation of the site of Troy, which was the first attempt on a large scale to widen the knowledge with the help of the spade. A spade is a shovel, so with the help of a shovel. To America by the excavation in recent times of Sardis, and to Germany by the unearthing of the records of the ancient Anatolian Empire at Bogaz Koi, has fallen the glory of revealing its history in days when Greek commerce and Greek language had not yet conquered the vast area that lies between the Black Sea and the Alexandretta, between the Aegean and the mountains of the Anti-Taurus and Armenia. So they're saying, I guess a lot of people would find this offensive now because they're crediting all of the knowledge of ancient history of Turkey to Europeans, but oh well, if that's true, right? And they're saying that they're talking about the time before Greece had influence over this area. So pre-Hellenic Turkey. is what they're talking about. To the ancients, indeed, the bounds of the peninsula towards the east were vague and uncertain. Strabo proposed to draw a line from the eastern end of the plain of Tarsus to Sinope or Amisus, Samsun, in the Black Sea. Such a line would form no proper geographical boundary, though at an earlier period such a division might have commended itself to the Greeks, who felt that with the winding Halys ended even vague knowledge of the interior of the peninsula. Well, I think I have to read that again. Let's see. To the ancients, indeed, the bounds of the peninsula towards the east were vague and uncertain. Strabo proposed to draw a line from the eastern end of the plain of Tarsus. Let me see if I can find that on a map, just to understand what they're talking about. The plain of Tarsus. Okay. Well, Google Earth shows a city called Tarsus, and I don't know if that is related to what is, because I'm looking for plain of Tarsus, and it shows this city of Tarsus. Maybe that is on the Tarsus plain. Maybe this area here is the Tarsus plain. Maybe I can find. Let's see if I can find it on. Like an ancient map. Plain, maybe it doesn't exist anymore. Plain of Tarsus, or the name doesn't exist anymore. Let's see. Yeah, I still get pictures of that same area, but I don't see anybody calling it a plain. Maybe they don't say that anymore. I don't know. But I guess it's safe to assume it's this area that they're talking about. This area here. So I am imagining this must be the plain of Tarsus. Okay. So let's see. To the ancients, indeed, the bounds of the peninsula towards the east were vague and uncertain. Strabo proposed to draw a line from the eastern end of the plain of Tarsus to Sinope. So let's see where Sinope is. Let's see if we can get... And then Sinope. All right. So Sinope is practically north of Tarsus. So Tarsus is at the bottom, is at the bottom of the map, and Sinope is at the top. So he suggested, whoever that person is, suggested drawing a line, saying cutting off the peninsula here. I guess when they say peninsula, they are talking about all of Turkey, all of this part on the Asian side of Turkey. Okay. Let's go back. Or Amisus, Samsun, to the Black Sea. Such a line would form no proper geographical boundary. Though at an earlier period such a division might have commended itself to the Greeks, who felt that the winding Halys ended even vague knowledge of the interior of the peninsula. So maybe people didn't often go beyond that line. It's not a real... when he calls it, what do they say? They say geographical boundary. So maybe there's no mountains or river or anything that marks that, but it wasn't very typical for at least Greeks to go beyond that very much. I'm sure they did, but I guess it wasn't so common. That's how I'm interpreting it. I don't know. Geographically, Asia Minor is a curious land. If one may use a homely image, the peninsula may be compared to a gigantic inverted pie dish, the bottom of which is surrounded by a raised foot. The narrow lip of the inverted vessel is raised by little above sea level. Behind rises the body of a dish to an average height of 3,000 to 3,500 feet, and surrounding this is the foot, formed to the south by the Great Taurus Range, and continued to the northeast by the Anti-Taurus. This mighty rampart the invader has generally found invincible. Well, so they're describing the geography. I'm not really sure, it's hard to imagine. But if they say an inverted pie dish, that means an upside down pie dish. So it's flat and then suddenly it gets big, and that's very hard apparently for armies to deal with. So it acted as a protection. The Cilician gates above Tarsus are an entrance and an exit made by human hands, and being unapproachable by a host in days before artillery, were not difficult to hold by a small but determined force. A slight change of ground for the defenders still leaves this impregnable. Impregnable means you can't penetrate it, you can't go through it, you can't. So let's see, a slight change of ground for the defenders still leaves this pass impregnable. So even now, it's very difficult to get past this geography if you're an invader. The last invaders of the peninsula who have made good its possession, the Turks, came into it by the mountains of Armenia, far to the east, the range of the Amanus, which forms the dividing line between the plain of Tarsus and Cilicia and Syria, is less formidable. Access, also from Mesopotamia, is not difficult, and the powerful states of that region at an early period availed themselves to this route to the metalworking areas of the Black Sea. So if you're coming from the north, if you're coming from Europe, that's a very difficult place to access. But if you're coming from the east, from Syria or Armenia, it actually isn't so difficult to get into that area. So it just works one way. And it seems that, so the people who live in that area probably came from the east. On the north side, though the interior is cut off from the sea by similar, though lower ranges of mountains, the foot is neither so continuous nor so difficult of an access. On the northwest and the west, the peninsula is more vulnerable. From the plain of Troy, or along the valleys of the Hermus and the Meander, lay routes for trade and for war. The Crusaders, with Godfrey, gathered at Dorylaeum, Esquicer. Cyrus the Younger started from Sardis on the Hermus for his expedition to distant Babylon against his brother Artaxerxes, and at Selene, the later Apamea, Alexander's forces converged when they were set out upon the conquest of the Persian Empire to its farthest eastern bounds. The climatic conditions of the great central plateau of Asia Minor are very different from those of its coastlands. Its rivers descending from the lofty heights of the tableland bring down with them great quantities of solid matter, which in the course of ages have extended to the coastline far out to sea, and produced a low-lying, marshy, and malarious area at the foot of the steep slopes which ascend to the central plain. The islands of Lade, off which the Greeks and Persians fought a battle in 494 BC, is now a hill some miles inland. The Central Plain is to a large extent treeless and better suited for pasture than for agriculture. The climate of this area is continental. The summers are hot and the winters severe. The slopes which border the southern side of the Black Sea, on the other hand, form one of the most beautiful countries in the world, rich in forest and fruit trees, and in flowering plants. East of Trebizond, the rhododendron and azalea here upon their native soil, blossom in the greatest profusion. So rhododendrons and azaleas, I think those are trees. Or rhododendron, I think, is a flower. Oh well, I've heard that word before. I don't really know what it is, so let's find a picture of it just so we know. I can't spell that word. Here we go. It's like a bush, a flowering bush. Let me get you a picture here. This is a rhododendron. And then azalea, let's see. Kind of looks similar. So they say that this is the home of the rhododendron and the azalea, and you can find many of them here. It's very common. You see them everywhere. That's pretty much what they're saying. The alluvial soil, alluvia, that always means water or rain. That means rain. So the alluvial soil, I guess it means like soil that has a lot of rain? I don't know. Let's see. Or maybe they're referring to the alluvial period. Let's see. Of western shores is deep and rich, a land fit for the growth and maintenance of great cities, which could draw to themselves the wealth in corn and wool of the hinterland, and well provided the harbors from which daring mariners might carry to north and south, and the west the rich products which had accumulated in their towns. On the south plain of Cilicia was probably always unwholesome from its malarious marshes. Now we've seen that word marsh. Like I said, probably if English is your first language, you probably know what a marsh is. But like I said, I have this habit of explaining things like this because my main channel is teaching English. So this would be a word that most people don't know. A marsh is like a swamp. And what do they call it? Unwholesome, which is just another way of saying unhealthy. So they're saying this is an unhealthy area. It's an area where you would get sick because of the marshes. And they refer to it as malarial, meaning probably malaria was very common because of the mosquitoes. So on the south plain of Cilicia was probably always unhealthy from its malarious marshes. So these marshes had a lot of mosquitoes, which could give you malaria. But it was important as a connecting Asian Minor with the southern neighbors, Syria and Palestine. I just have to recenter this. By far the most important of the rivers of Asia Minor was the Halys, now the Kizil Irmak, or Red River, which, rising in the mountains of the Lesser Armenia, runs for some distance in a westerly direction, almost parallel to the Euphrates. Let's find that on a map. Let's see. Kizil Irmak. Kizil Irmak. River. Just so we can get an idea of what area they're talking about. This all seems to be the same area. I forget the names of the places that they were talking about before, but they all seem to be, it's like Eastern Turkey. All of this is Eastern Turkey. By far the most important of the rivers of Asia Minor was the Halys, now the Kizil Irmak, or Red River, which, rising in the mountains of Lesser Armenia, runs for some distance in a westerly direction, so it moves west, almost parallel to the Euphrates. Parallel means two things are going in the same direction. So if the Euphrates is going in this direction, also the Kizil Irmak River is going in that same direction. They follow each other. And having made a tremendous curve to the southwest, turns gradually northwards and finds its way to the Black Sea, some 30 or 40 miles to the northwest of Samsun. Of less importance are other northward flowing rivers, the Iris, east of the Halys, formed by the junction is where two things meet, formed by the junction of the ancient Skylax and Lysis, and much farther to the west, the Sangarius, which, emptying itself into the Black Sea, some 60 or 70 miles east of the Bosporus, seems to make the eastern boundary of Homer's knowledge. The eastern boundary. But I thought let's see, because I think the Bosporus, that's where Istanbul is, isn't it? Let's see. Bosporus. Yeah. That's I guess the strait where Istanbul is. So that's Western Turkey. That's here. Oh gosh. I haven't done this in a while and I'm a little bit. So the Bosporus is this area that separates Asia Minor and Europe. And I'm not sure what they're saying. If they're saying that Homer's knowledge was actually this eastern part, where they're talking about these rivers, I guess that must be. But so this is kind of the boundary of the knowledge of Homer, the eastern part of Turkey. From its banks, Priam of Troy brought Hecuba to be his bride, and there he fought against the mysterious women warriors, the Amazons, whose legend in the lands of the east of the Halys is not even now extinct. Apart from the Halys, the most important of the Anatolian rivers are those which flow westwards. The Simois, the Scamander of Troy. Where is Troy? Let's see. That's a very famous city, but where exactly is it? Well, I'm going to type, because there are a lot of places in the US called Troy. Ancient Troy. Oh, okay. Just in case you didn't know, let me put Troy up here. This is where ancient Troy is. That's not too far away from Istanbul. Troy would have had no importance in the world had it not been for the Homeric epic of the Tale of Troy, centered on their banks. The Caicus flowing southwestwards, not far from the later Pergamum, the Hermus traversing a comparatively narrow valley, on the southern slope of which stood Sardis, the capital of the Lydian Empire, and Magnesia near Mount Sipylus, and entering a bay on the southern side of which stood Smyrna, the Caster, through marshes famed for waterfowl, reaching the sea at Ephesus. The meander pouring through a broad valley studded on either side by famous cities. All of these play an important part in Greek history and legend. In the mountainous country of Lycia, the rivers are naturally shorter and less important. Through picturesque gorges, the Saris, Sehun, and Paramus, Jehun, break into the Cilician plain, which owes its extent to them, though they are too swift to be of use for the exploitation of the mountainous country inland. So what they're doing is they're describing the position of rivers and water areas in relation to important cities. And I think that's all we can say about that. They say a lot of small rivers I've never heard of. Some of the rivers are too violent, I guess, for traveling or for shipping or for any use. In this mountainous country, volcanic rocks through which run veins of valuable metals rise here and there amid the prevalent limestone of the peninsula. Probably the earliest inroads into Asia, which history as yet records, are those of enterprising traders from Mesopotamia, who have left behind them evidence in pottery and inscriptions of their presence more than 20 centuries before Christ. At Kultepe, south of the Great Bend of the Halys near Caesarea Mazaca, there seemed to have been an emporium for the iron forged by the Chalybes, far to the north on the slopes near the Black Sea, between Samsun and Trebizond, a mysterious people living in dens and caves of the earth, giving rise to legends of mysterious dwarves and supplying the Greeks with the name for steel, which seems to have become known for them the first time in this area. So these mysterious magical people, I guess the legend is they introduced the Greeks to steel, and the Greeks used that word for steel. What is the Greek word for steel? Greek word for steel. Atsali. Atsali.
Atsali.
Yeah, atsali. Well, I don't know if that's the ancient Greek word for steel, but apparently the legend is that these mysterious magical people introduced the Greeks to steel. That's interesting. I just want to read that again, just to make sure that I have it. Just to make sure I understood it correctly. So, a mysterious people living in dens and caves of the earth, giving rise to legends of mysterious dwarves, and supplying the Greeks with a name for steel which seems to have become known to them for the first time from this area. So it looks like that's how the Greeks discovered steel. It was from this area, and there's a legend, a story, that these mysterious people who lived in caves and underground were the ones who introduced it to them and gave the name to it. This country is rich in minerals. Strabo speculates on the relation between the name of the Chalybes and Alibi, whence, according to Homer, was the origin of silver. So according to Homer, this is where the Greeks discovered silver also. It is possible, in the case of foreign names, that the phonetic laws of Greek did not hold, and that some connection did exist. In modern times, a relation has been seen between alibi and the word for silver. What is the Greek word for silver? We're learning Greek today. Asimi.
Silver.
Wait.
Asimi.
Asimi. And the existence, according to Pliny, of a river, Sidenum, and a tribe of Sideni, to which Strabo adds a town side, Side, suggests that here also may be the origin of sideros, the Greek word for iron. I just wonder if I'm just going to look up iron here. Yeah, sidero. Okay. The Greek word for iron, the etymology of which is unknown. So they have these mysterious words that don't seem to be Greek in origin for silver and iron and steel. And these are also, some of them are place names. It is probable that from the earliest times on the Central Plains at least, and extending down into the mountainous country to the southwest, was a population with a striking physiognomy. So striking means like it gets your attention. It's amazing. And physiognomy, I think, means like physical characteristics. So let's just define that word, physiognomy. Physiognomy. Yeah, facial features or expression, especially when regarded as indicative of character or ethnic origin. Friends began to notice a change in his physiognomy. No normal person would use that in regular conversation, I think. But so when they say striking physiognomy, so their faces were very unique. And I'm not sure if that's a compliment or an insult. I guess maybe we'll find out, though. Let's see. Let's go back and read this again. It is probable that from the earliest times on the Central Plains, at least, and extending down into the mountainous country... Oh, wait, where's physiognomy? Oh, yeah, okay, sorry. Let's do that again. It is probable that from the earliest times on the Central Plains, at least, and extending down into the mountainous country to the southwest, was a population with a striking physiognomy. So there was a group of people very separate from the people living in the area, and they had a striking physiognomy. That means the way they looked got your attention. It was very different somehow. Their faces. Which is still common amongst Armenian population of today. So even if you go to Armenia now, you should see very unique facial features. I think that's what they're saying. Well, now, I don't know how much things have changed. This book is over 100 years old, so maybe Armenia has changed quite a bit. But if it hasn't, you should be able to notice that Armenians look very distinct in their faces. Of this population, these special characteristics are a prominent nose, so they have big noses, in line with the forehead, receding and rising to an unusual height. So receding means going back, receding and rising. Okay. I wonder what happens if we type Armenian physiognomy. Armenian physiognomy. So maybe we can see a picture of what they're trying to describe. Whoops, wrong one. So I guess they're describing something like this. So the prominent nose, big nose, but also receding forehead means the forehead moves back. And what was the other word that they used? Because he said receding and Whoops. Receding and rising, so going up and back. I guess that kind of looks like the picture. I guess that's what they're trying to describe. How far this strange configuration of head is natural, and how far increased by the practice of mothers to tie very tightly round the heads of their babies a towel, which when soaked in water exercises great pressure upon the tender bones of infancy, is still a matter of dispute amongst experts. So the mothers used to tie something around the baby's head, and people, at least back then, 100 years ago, they weren't sure if this was the reason the forehead became very big, or if it's genetics. They don't know. Probably art has only increased the sloping forehead given by nature, and the Hittite warriors of the 14th century BC and the Armenians of today have the same characteristic profile. It may be fairly assumed that the rich coastlands drew from very early times invaders to establish themselves. Throughout history, we find on the sea level a population differing from that which holds a great central plain. Much as along the eastern shore of the Adriatic, the coast population has generally differed from that of the inland country high above it, the pastoral people of the plateau. However, must in early times have been to some extent migratory because of the difficulty of keeping their flocks alive during the stress of winter, just as to this day the sheep of the highlands of Scotland migrate to the lowlands in the winter where food is more plentiful and accessible. So in Asia Minor, the primitive Anatolian shepherd must have moved towards the coast in the winter season. Geographical conditions tend to produce the same results in distant ages, and the migratory Yuruks of modern times, though nominally of an alien stock, really only reproduce the practice of the primitive age. In both the periods and development of a strong people along the coast was bound to hamper and to ultimately limit in a great degree the ancient summer and winter migrations of the flocks. That word hamper means like be an obstacle or prevent. So it's very similar to the other word that they use here, limit, to hamper and limit the, in a great degree, the ancient summer and winter migrations. So what was hampering them? Geographical conditions tend to produce the same results in distant ages, and the migratory Yuruks of modern times, though nominally. So these migratory people, the Yuruks, they're separate in name only, but they really look like most of the people in the area. Okay, let's move on to part 2, which is the Hittites and other peoples of Asia Minor. This country of Asia Minor, ever since history began, has been a country of passage between East and West, and its whole history is a record of migrations to and fro. To and fro means like coming and going this way and then going back that way. To and fro. Across it from Central Asia, Europe, or from Europe to Central Asia, Afghanistan, and India. Out of the Aboriginal people seems to have grown the mighty empire of the Hittites, who, though known to us from the OT, I think that means Old Testament in the Bible, as settled in Palestine were only, as we now learn, immigrants into the area and had their home much farther to the north, in the area where we find them prominent in the earliest times, as the White Syrians. The epithet white was apparently given to them to distinguish them from the Phoenicians, or red Syrians, and it is noticeable that in Egyptian art, the Hittites are represented as of a paler color than the red Phoenicians. But I once... No, never mind. I'm not going to say it. Let's just keep going. The ethnological and philological relations of the stock are still uncertain. The kings of Babylon, according to legend, were in touch with them nearly 3,000 years before Christ. From Tel El Amarna and from Assyria come two fragments which relate this story. The campaign made by Sargon I in Cappadocia in the 3rd year of his reign, in order to relieve the Babylonian colony of traders at Ganesh, Canis, from the attacks of the king of Burashkanda. In Ganesh, Canis, we recognize the modern Kultepe, a colony which had been founded by the city of Kish in southern Babylonia. Sargon's date is fixed about 2850 BC. Some 600 years later are dated the cuneiform inscriptions found at Kultepe, which were the records of a business house in the colony. From about 1800 BC, the Hittites come more fully into the light of history. Since the beginning of archaeological exploration of Asia Minor, stone carvings of a very characteristic kind have been found in various parts. Some are obviously under the influence of Assyrian art, but others bear a distinctive character of their own. One of the largest known and one of the most striking, remember striking kind of means amazing, gets your attention, though probably also one of the latest in date, is the famous rock carving of Ivriz in a gorge ascending from the Laconian plain not many miles from Erigil. Let's see, let's look at this. The rock carving of Ivriz. What is that? Rock carving of Ivriz. Oh, that's kind of interesting. This is the rock carving of Ivriz. Wait. I guess that's all there is. That's all there is in Ivriz. Let's see what they have to say about that. There is represented a scene of a king clothed in an embroidered robe and a mantle, in an attitude of supplication before a larger and sturdier figure. Sturdy means like very strong or substantial, which obviously represents a deity of vegetation. So this picture shows a king being very submissive to some bigger figure, and the way that they're interpreting this is that it is a god of vegetation, like a god of farming or something like that. But maybe it's an alien or something like that. Wait, let's look and see again. Does it look like an alien? I don't really see... It's hard to see two people. Okay. Oh, okay. No, I think this one's clearer. Let's see. So I guess... Oh. Let me see if I can... center this better. So the being on the left, I guess, is supposed to be the god of vegetation, but I think maybe it could be like an alien or something like that. And the person on the right, the smaller one, is the king saying thank you for whatever, helping us or teaching agriculture to us. Maybe this is one of the fallen angels. Oh, let's see. So there's represented a scene of a king clothed in an embroidered robe and a mantle. What is a mantle? I mean, that word makes sense in modern English, but I don't know. I'm not sure what mantle clothing. Let's see. Oh, it's I guess it's like a cape or like something covering your shoulders, maybe. Something like that. Okay. In an attitude of supplication. Supplication means like being submissive, saying thank you or showing appreciation. Before a larger and sturdier figure, which obviously represents the deity of vegetation. Well, I don't know how obvious that is. Could be a lot of things, couldn't it? For in his right hand he holds a vine branch with 3 great clusters of grapes. And in his left, sorry, I lost my place. Let me find it. And in his left he grasps a handful of ears of corn. On the rock between the face of the deity and the upheld corn ears is an inscription in a peculiar hieroglyphics, which we now know to be of the Hittites. The dress of the god is simpler than that of his worshipper, being a tunic with a downward curving hem, making a point in front. Round his waist, he wears an ornamental girdle. Both figures have thick curly hair reaching the nape of the neck and curly beards. Experts assign these figures to the 8th century BC. To a much earlier period belong some figures of the sun god Teshub, with a curly beard well known in Assyrian sculpture, but with his hair in a long queue under a bell-shaped cap. He too wears a tunic with a belt in which is thrust a sword. Round the tunic runs an ornamental hem, and on his feet he has shoes with upturned toes. In his right hand, the god wields, that means like holds, like he's going to use it, wields a battle axe, and in his left, he holds a symbol of lightning, which might be compared to a scourge with 3 thongs. For the history of the Hittites before the 15th century BC, our information is very scanty. Scanty means there isn't much of it. So anything before the 15th century BC, there isn't much information. But it would seem that gradually they pushed down into the valley of the Euphrates on one side and into western Syria and Palestine on the other. The later Assyrians have indeed been well described as Hittites, who had adopted the civilization of Babylon. Their pressure along the Mediterranean coast brought them in time into contact with Egypt, whose conquests were spreading upwards from the south. From the annals of the Thutmose III, we learn that he more than once received presents from the princes of Kerta, and we can still see the representation of envoys bringing gifts, and of subject princes of Keftiu and Keta. The details belong to the history of Egypt. See page 77 and 82. In later centuries, a Hittite kingdom existed, with its center at Carchemish, but its importance was secondary, and in 717 BC it succumbed finally to the Assyrians. Ramses II is said to have subdued the peoples of the sea, a vague title, which it is hardly possible as yet to define with accuracy. It is clear that these people were not merely raiding brigands, but migrated from land to land with all their belongings. What is a brigand? Brigand. What? Let me try that again. Brigand. Member of a gang that ambushes and robs people in forests and mountains. So that's like Robin Hood, I guess, was a brigand. So it is clear that these people were not merely raiding brigands, but migrated from land to land with all their belongings, their wives and children. So they weren't just bandits stealing things, but they were constantly traveling. Much as the Gauls of the later date attacked and occupied, for a time at least, various parts of Europe and even Asia. Their name survives in the mysterious peoples whom the Greeks called Pelasgoi. The term is a quite regular derivative from the stem of something in Greek, the sea, and ending with kos, frequently employed in tribal names. To the Greeks themselves, these peoples were in later times nothing but a name. They identified them on the coast of Thrace, in Lemnos, in Attica, and the very foot of the Acropolis in northwest Greece, in Crete, in Italy and other places. But what tongue they spoke, whence they came, and whither they went, they were entirely unable to tell. In the time of Herodotus, the Pelasgians were still to be found in Thrace and in the neighborhood of Hellespont. Their language Herodotus regarded as non-Greek. In the Athenians and Ionians, he saw the Pelasgian people who had become Hellenized. In truth, it was not unnatural that the ancients should not be able to define the race or the language of the Pelasgians. For like other rovers of ancient and modern times, they were probably neither of one race nor of one speech. Thus they are no doubt accurately described in the great Karnak inscription by the Egyptians as northerners coming from all lands. In the letters from Tel el Amarna, before the middle of the 14th century BC, mention is made of certain tribes, Dununa, Shardina, Shekalsha, which with greater or less certainty have been identified with Greek Danai, men of Sardis, or of Sardinia, and men of Sagalesis, north of Pisidia. In the reign of Ramses II, around 1290 BC, they have become very formidable, and in combination with the Hittites and other foes are a serious danger to Egypt. The identifications of the imperfect Egyptian method of writing the names are again necessarily uncertain, but with fair probability there may be distinguished Lycians, Cilicians, Dardani, presumably from Troyland, and more doubtfully men from Mysia, Pedasus, and Pedasus. Ramses II was successful in staving off the evil day when Egyptian decadence must submit to foreign conquest. Before many years had passed, his son, King Merneptah, found he had still more formidable coalition occupying. Sorry, I'm getting distracted. Let me just check something here. Okay. I just had to readjust. All right. He found that he still had more formidable coalition of foreign foes to meet. For some time, Libyan tribes had been occupying the western delta. Now they are backed by a strong alliance in which the Lycians appear as before. The Shardina, to be identified with the Sardinians, who had been mercenaries of Ramses II, are now opposed to the Egyptians. With them come Tursha, who are held to be Etruscans, and Akaiwasha, Greek Achaeans. If the Shalkasha of the 14th century were men of Segolassus, unless there had meantime been some western migration, it is difficult to identify them with Sicyls of Sicily. See further, chapter 12. The incursions of these mysterious sea folk we probably owe it that some of the names of peoples which are known to us in early times have in later days ceased to be familiar. In the mountainous country of southwest Asia Minor, it would not be surprising if there were relics of several races which had succeeded one another, each newcomer in turn subdued by a later. The name, however, of Lycia is old, and Egyptian scholars argue that in the Ruku of Egyptian monuments are to be found the ancient Lycians who, along with other sea folk, had fought against the Egyptians and been taken captive. But even so, Herodotus recognized a still more ancient name of the country in Milias, and earlier inhabitants in the Solimi and Tremili. These tribes were regarded as being extremely ancient, for to Bellerophon was ascribed the change of the name of Tremili into Lycians. Yet even in the time of Herodotus, the name Termili was still familiar. In the later populations, scholars are inclined to see a stock that had migrated from the island of Crete, which the poet of the Odyssey, or his interpolator, recognized as a land of 90 cities, in which were many peoples, and among them the Pelasgoi. Wild as this corner of Asia is, it has preserved more records in the form of non-Greek inscriptions than any other district as yet of the western littoral of Asia Minor. But though the inscriptions are numerous, it cannot be said that they throw light upon the origins of the language, which, after discussions protracted over many years, cannot certainly be referred to any of the known families of language. In many respects, the Lycian customs resembled those of the Carians. But in one way, they were conspicuously different. The Lycians counted kin through the mother, legitimized the offspring of the union between a woman who was a citizen and a slave, and deprived of rights the children of a male citizen and a slave woman. Their next neighbors, the Carians, were somewhat more fortunate, for in them were recognized by the ancients, and their statement is not disputed by the moderns, a population extending over many of the islands which in later times were Greek, and believed at one time to have occupied the mainland of Greece itself. In the days of Thucydides, Graves opened by the Athenians for the purification of the island of Delos showed, according to the historian, skeletons of which more than half were recognized by the armor buried with them and by the form of burial as being Carians. Whatever its origin, this also was a fighting stock which supplied mercenaries to Asiatic and Egyptian potentates. What is a potentate? I guess that comes from the word potential, but let's see. Potentate. A monarch or ruler, especially one of autocratic one. Autocratic, like a dictator? Yeah. Absolute power. So how do they use potentate here? Whatever its origin, this is also was a fighting stock which supplied mercenaries to Asiatic and Egyptian potentates. So I guess they saw the Egyptian rulers as being very powerful, one-figure people. So you had your king or your queen, your pharaoh or pharaohs, and they had absolute power, which I guess required mercenaries, people from other places, to act as soldiers or enforcers. So they were fighting, so these mysterious people were fighting stock, they were fighting people, and they were used very frequently in Egypt and parts of Asia Minor by the dictators to enforce their laws and rules, I guess, or to wage war. Most of the little that we know of the Carian language is drawn from the names scratched in an idle hour upon the monuments on the banks of the Upper Nile. In Caria also there seems to have been a mixture of populations. The people of Kaunis, in the eyes of Herodotus, were natives of the soil, while according to him the Carians came to the mainland from the islands. There, in the time of Minos, they were called Leleges, and lived free of tribute, having no duty but to man his ships when Minos called upon them to do so. So they didn't pay taxes, and they lived on the islands. But if they were ordered to fight, they had to come and fight. The people of Kaunis also claimed, like the Lycians, that they came from Crete. This is hardly likely if, as says the historian who himself came into the Carian coast, their customs differed from those of every other people. So they say that they're from Crete, but it doesn't seem like they're from Crete because they act very differently from the people on Crete. They have different ways. The relation between Leleges and Carians is no less difficult. According to Herodotus, Leleges was but an old name of the Carians by which they were called when they occupied the islands. On the other hand, it's not likely that Philip of Thanggela, himself a native of Caria, was right in declaring that Leleges stood in the same relation to the Carians as the Helots to their Lacedaemonian masters, and the Penestae to their Thessalian overlords. Oh boy, that's kind of hard to understand what they're saying here. On the other hand, it's not likely that Philip of Thanggela himself, a native of Caria, was right in declaring that Leleges stood in the same relation to the Carians as the Helots. Well, they keep using these words like I don't know what these groups of people are, but there seems to be one group in charge and then one subservient group, because it says Lacedaemonian masters and the Penestae to their the Sellian overlords. So you've got like a master and then somebody below it. In spite of the lateness of the authority, it seems not at all unlikely that Caria, as in Greece, there was an early population reduced to serfdom by later incomers. With the Carians, Herodotus classes the Lydians and the Mysians, assuring us that they had a common worship at the temple of Carian Zeus and Mylassa in Caria, Lydas and Mysis, the eponymous heroes of the Lydians and the Mysians, being brothers of Car, the founder of the Carians. Even Strabo, who agrees with Herodotus that the Carians, when they were subjects of Minos in the islands, were called Leleges, admits that when they occupied the mainland of Asia, they took from Leleges and Pelasgoi mainly the lands which they held henceforth. Oh, that's so wordy, but I think they're just saying that they obviously came from some other place. They weren't native to that place, but it's so confusing the way that they write it or word it. Okay. More important for the part they played in the 7th and 6th centuries were the Lydians. In Homer, however, the name of the Lydians is entirely unknown, their place being taken by the Minoans. Homer links Minoia and Phrygia, and in a simile of the Iliad speaks of the Minoan and Carian women staining ivory with red to be cheekpiece of a bridle. They have a footnote here, but is it on the other? Where is it? They have footnote number 7, but then it's not here at the bottom of the page. So I'm wondering what that means. A cheek piece of a bridle. In the 10th book of the Iliad, Lycians, Mysians, Phrygians, and Minoians are encamped together. Unfortunately, the results of the American excavations at Sardis, so far as yet published, have not thrown so much light as was expected upon the history of the Lydians, but here and elsewhere on this coast, it may be conjectured that the Minoians were an earlier people subdued and ultimately assimilated by the Lydians. Some Minoians, however, were still important enough to be distinguished in Xerxes' army from the Lydians. Their military equipment was like that of the Cilicians. Pliny says that there were still Minoians at the foot of the Tmolus of the river Cogamus, at no great distance from Sardis, which was their legal center. Whence the Lydians may have come cannot as yet be determined. The country was one to tempt the invader, for besides the richness of the long river valley, gold dust was obtained from the Mount Tmolus. Herodotus could discover little in the customs of the people to distinguish them from the Greeks, except for one curious practice of the common people, among whom daughters earned their own dowries as courtesans. So, it's not clear where the... What group are we talking about here? Which group was it? The Lydians? So it's not really clear where the Lydians came, but they acted very much like Greek people, except they had a couple of different customs. That's all they're saying. Most important of all his statements regarding them, in his circumstantial account of their colonization of Etruria, no statement in Herodotus has perhaps more hotly been disputed, but long after discussion no other view, to say the least, appears more plausible. From the inscriptions already published from the Sardis, it is impossible to say that Lydian and Etruscan are very closely related, though they have undoubtedly a superficial resemblance. Here we must wait for further information, but there is one point of resemblance which has been but little noticed. The Lydians, it is well known, had a great passion for jewelry. From the plates in the British Museum catalogue of ancient jewelry, it is very clear that there was an intimate relation between the jewelry of Ionia, influenced by Lydia, and the jewelry of Etruria. Both are characterized by figures of lions and lion-taming goddesses, and the frequent use of the Sphinx and of female heads, probably representing a goddess. A further item is added to the complexity of the problem by the bas relief found in Lemnos, and first published in 1886, which shows a striking bust of a warrior holding a spear with a leaf-shaped head. Two inscriptions in an unknown tongue are written alongside an archaic form of the Greek alphabet. Here again, the language, though unknown, has still a more striking resemblance to Etruscan. Till more light can be obtained upon this perplexing problem, we may adhere to the belief that the Lydians, the Etruscans, and the authors of these remarkable Lemnian inscriptions. I'm just going to look for Lemnian inscriptions. I don't know if this is what they're talking about, but this is what I found. So I guess this is Lemnian? Looks like Greek. Oh, somebody, let's see if I can show this. Somebody took the time to make it look clearer. They wrote it out. It kind of looks, well, all right. I'm always interested when I hear about mysterious languages, so I just wanted to see what the mysterious language looked like written down. The authors of these remarkable Lemnian inscriptions were part of the peoples of the sea whom the Greeks vaguely called Pelasgoi. And we may believe that in Lydia and in Etruria, they established themselves on great mainland territories, possibly from an island home. The detailed investigation of these facts is a matter of rather for comparative philology than for history. Until greater agreement among authorities is attained, it would be idle to draw serious historical conclusions from them. So they're saying we have to wait until we have more information before we can say anything really definitive about these people. I just want to see what this word philology means. Branch of knowledge that deals with structure, historical development, and relationships of language or languages. The most northerly position amongst the peoples of the western littoral of Asia Minor was occupied by the Mysians, or Mysians, who, according to the ancient writers, were of Thracian descent and were connected with the inhabitants of the district on the south of the Danube, known in later times as Moesia. Here, however, there can be little doubt that there was an earlier substratum of population and possibly more than one. To this earlier population must be ascribed the worship which was common to Mysians, Lydians, and Carians. In Mysia was the Troad, the most famous area, or Troad. I'm not sure how to say that. I think it sounds better Troad, because Troad sounds like toad. So let's say Troad. In Mysia, there was the Troad, the most famous area in the earliest literature of Europe, with its renowned city of Ilios, and its two famous sieges, second of which attained to the greater luster possibly merely from the fact that it was the theme of the greatest of poets. Okay, now we're at part 3, Indo-Europeans, contact with Europe. With the access to the Dardanelles, we pass into a new area, the connection of which are more with Europe than with Asia, for across this narrow strait of the Hellespont, even more by the waters of the Golden Horn, the teeming populations of Thrace passed into Asia from Europe. Not once nor twice, but many times, a succession of waves of population flowed over this northern land. The mountain ranges are parallel to the sea coast, and by a long valley which runs up through Paphlagonia to Halys, have passed through all ages the armies which have made or marred the fate of Asiatic empires. We must think of these waves as following one another, each helping to propel still farther eastwards the wave that preceded it. One of the earliest, though probably not the first, of these waves has only lately become known to us. In 1907, we first published from the German discoveries at the Bogaz Koi the names of the Indian deities Mitra, Varuna, Indra, and the heavenly twins, the Nasatyas. The records belong to about the beginning of the 14th century BC, and in spite of the difficulties of the cuneiform syllabary, there could be no doubt that there were names, that here were the names well known in Indian mythology, though at a distance of some 2,500 miles from the nearest point of India. Since then, numerals and other words have been discovered of the same origin. It is noticeable that words are not, as might be expected, in the Iranian forms, which in later times are distinguished from the Indian forms by well-marked phonetic differences. There is no probability that we have at this earliest date the records of Indian princes carrying their conquests so far afield. The only feasible conclusion is that here we have, in the 14th century BC, the records of the Aryan people not yet differentiated into Iranians and Indians, who at a later period formed these two important Indo-European stocks. Much is still uncertain with regard to many of the records discovered at Bogaz Koi. I'm just going to Google that. If I Google Bogaz Koi, I just wonder what kind of objects it would show. As I keep mentioning this place, it must be important. I've never heard of it. So I have some interesting images. Let's see what else we can find. With some writing. That looks like very unusual writing. That doesn't really look like Greek or anything. I wonder what that is. These must be the cuneiform tablets that they're referring to. Do they show it here on a map where it is? Okay. Well, let's go back. But this at all events is beyond dispute, that amongst the peoples who for a time centered around this ancient Hittite capital were some speaking languages containing a strong Indo-European element in their vocabulary. The surest proof that Indo-European and other peoples had been in close contact. The course of their wanderings we do not know as yet, but close upon them must have been followed the people now known as the Armenians, who in the time of Herodotus, as now, were seated upon the upper waters of the Euphrates, and were the subject population of an alien empire, even as they are today. Although the alien empire in the 5th century BC was that of the great Darius of Persia, to Herodotus the Armenians are an offshoot of the Phrygians. I don't know if it's... Well, I'm just going to check the pronunciation of that. Phrygians or Phrygians? Let's see.
Phrygian. Phrygian.
Well, so Google suggests Phrygian. I don't know if I should trust that. But I guess I'll have to. I don't have any other source to use right now. So we'll say Phrygians. There's no reason to doubt that the statement of Herodotus that the Phrygians were a European stock which had passed into Asia from the Macedonian area, in which they had been known to their neighbors as Brigus. In ancient Phrygian language, we have two series of inscriptions earlier, dating back from about I just have to recenter this. The 6th century BC, the later and more numerous being the tomb inscriptions of the Roman period. From Armenia comes a rich literature beginning in the 5th century AD. The language, long supposed to be an offshoot of Iranian, was demonstrated in 1875 to be an independent branch of the Indo-European stock. To one and the same section belong all the peoples of this family which have been already mentioned. They are distinguished from the stocks of the same origin in Western Europe by their treatment of certain original guttural consonants, which these languages convert into some form of sibilant, while in Europe their remaining guttural sounds. The Phrygian invasion of Asia must have been a very important one. And Phrygia, in the heyday of its power, occupied a large part of the interior of Asia Minor, including that which in historical times was ultimately occupied by Gauls and named Galicia. Of the Paphlagonians, the people situated in the north of Phrygia, we know little. Their name was familiar to the Greeks from Homer downwards. In the catalogue of the ships, we are told that they were led by the shaggy heart of Flemenes from the Enetoi, whence is the race of wild mules. They were famous for their horses and horse breeding. But the most interesting point is the reference to the name of the Enetoi, to which the ancients found a counterpart in the Veneti on the banks of the Po in northern Italy. By Strabo's time, the Enetoi in Asia had entirely disappeared. Though even this was disputed, and Xenodotus identified Eneti, which he read in the text of Homer, with the town of Amisus, Samsun. Others accounted for their disappearance as due to the loss of Flemenes in the Trojan War, which led to their migration to Thrace after the destruction of Troy, and to their further migration to the north of Italy. Among Athenians, the Paphlagonians had an ill reputation as slaves. This character is probably to be interpreted as arising from the attitude of men who did not bow easily to the yoke. According to Strabo, their eastern boundary was the Halys, and they appeared to be distinct from the White Syrians or Hittites who lived beyond it. To the west of them were situated tribes, the Caucones and the Mariandini, who were soon absorbed by their neighbors in the Persian army, and the Mariandini were armed like the Paphlagonians, as were also the Ligias, otherwise unknown here, and the Matiani, though Herodotus more than once describes the Matiani as lying beyond the Armenians who bordered on Cappadocia. Their historical existence has long been a puzzle. I just have to recenter the page. For some reason, every time I change pages, I have to recenter it. It's kind of annoying, but what are you going to do? Okay. Regarding the earlier history of Matiani, however, the documents of Bogaz Khoi apparently afford a clue. Amongst the 8 peoples of whom the records are found in the great library unearthed at Bogaz Khoi between 1905 and 1907, there appears one named Manda, which is identified with the people of Naram Sin 700 years later at Mada in the 2nd millennium BC. The name appears several times as Manda in Assyrian inscriptions of the 1st millennium BC, first rarely as Amadai and Matai, and then frequently as Madai. At the beginning of the 1st millennium BC, a branch of the same people, as we learn from the Assyrian documents, is found settled near Lake Urmia. The oldest form of the name in Greek is preserved in the Cyprian Madoi. In the Bogaz Khoi documents, we are told that one branch of this people had neither tilled nor reaped their land, but that a king of the Hittites had made of them vassals, and compelled them to be tillers of the soil, thus converting the shepherds into husbandmen. So first they were just shepherds taking care of animals, and then the Hittite king made them into like slaves who had to farm. From this, we may conclude that Medes, as they are shown to be, must have been one of the earliest waves of Indo-European speaking peoples, or Wiros, who crossed into Asia. The fact that they came into Mesopotamia from the north is no proof that they did not cross Asia Minor in the first instance, so many of their successors did. It is not improbable that this was the source from which the mixed languages found at Bogaz Khoi obtained their Indo-European elements. The boundaries of Cappadocia seem to have varied greatly at different times. The wave of Phrygian invasion, which must have been one of the largest, cut off Cappadocia from Western Asia Minor, but through Catatonia and Laconia, it was able to maintain its connection with Cilicia. Though the most famous Hittite sites, Ayuk and Bogaz Khoi, were within the bend of the Halys, Hittite remains are more numerous between Halys and Taurus. An important road led from their capital at Bogaz Khoi to Caesarea Mazaca, whence a branch passed through Tiana and the Cilician gates to the Tarsus and the sea. The population of the mountains, part of Cilicia, seems to have been originally of the same stock as the Hittites. In this area, about 1200 BC, developed the Second Hittite Empire with Tirana as its capital. Readjustment time. When the ancient power at Bogaz Khoi had been overthrown by a confederation of tribes who carried their conquest into Syria and even threatened Egypt, when the Hittite Empire failed, the Phrygian power represented to the modern world by the legend and the monument of Midas took its place as the controlling force in the center of Asia Minor, until in its turn it was overthrown by the kings of Lydia, the last of whom, Croesus, succumbed to the Persians under Cyrus in 546 BC. As the Hittite stock seemed to represent the native population of Asia, as distinguished from the peoples of the sea and other late incomers, it is probable that the original population of the mountainous districts of Isauria, Pisidia, and possibly Milas in Lycia, whose inhabitants were identified with the Ptolemy, represent the same stock. The territory lying between the sea and Pisidia was, as its name, Pamphylia implies, tenanted by a mixture of peoples who, as on all low-lying coasts of Asia Minor, had pushed their way in from outside. Unlike most areas upon the Asiatic coast, Pamphylia was unable to maintain Greek with any purity. Consequently, of all Greek dialects, Pamphylian is the most modified by its surroundings. If, however, there is any truth in the theory that the endings in sos and nda are Carian, since they have been found on European as well as Asiatic territories, then there must have been a great influx of Carians into Pisidia. For of the 13 towns given by Strabo as Pisidian, 6 have the ending sos, the most important being Selagassos and Termosos. Cinda represents the other ending, and Adada. Timbriada and Amblada may also be akin. Strabo himself recognizes implicitly such a possibility when he states that they bordered on Phrygians, Lydians, and Carians, who, he quaintly says, are all peaceful peoples, though exposed to the north wind. I wonder what that means. While the Romans discovered to their cost that the Isaurians and Pisidians were much otherwise, and the Pamphylians, having a great share of Cilician blood amongst them, found it difficult to relinquish piracy. Here once more appear the Leleges, wanderers, says Strabo, and remaining here through similarity of character. In the Odyssey, the poet has heard of a mysterious people called the Cimmerians, who live on the threshold of the underworld, wrapped in mist and clouds, and the sun never looks down upon them, with his rays either at morn or eventide. But deadly night is over all. The people whose name was thus far made known to literature lived on the north side of the Black Sea and in and about the Crimean Peninsula at the end of the 8th century BC, or the beginning of the 7th. These Cimmerians, I'm just going to check if that's Cimmerians or Cimmerians.
Cimmerians.
Okay, well, I don't know if I trust that because it's just a kind of AI pronunciation. I don't know if that's real or not. I guess we'll say Cimmerians though. How do you pronounce Cimmerian? Okay, here's somebody in Reddit asking, how do you pronounce Cimmerian? According to Reddit people, again, I don't know how much I trust that. It's Cimmerians. Okay. At the end of the 8th century BC, or the beginning of the 7th, these Cimmerians were driven from their ancient seats by the invasion of the Skolat Scythians, who seem to have been mainly of Iranian stock. As a result, the Cimmerians moved first to the eastward and then found their way through the central pass of the Caucasus. The Scythians followed in their wake, but at the Caucasus they seem to have missed them. Going farther eastwards and passing through the Caspian Gates, they arrived at Azerbaijan and Media. The events that followed will be treated in the chapter on the Scythians in Volume 3. It is often dangerous to rely upon similarity of name, but the number of identical forms in Asia Minor and in the Balkan Peninsula is too great to be a product of mere accident. And in some cases, as the Enetoi and the Veneti, the ancients themselves were concerned to explain the coincidence. But besides the instance and the case of the Mysians and the Troad and the Moesians on the Danube, there were also the Dardania and Mysia from the Priam, from which Priam drew many of his forces, and Dardania and the western end of Mount Haemus. The name has been related by some authorities to the Albanian word for farmer, Dardhan, which is itself a derivative of Darte, the pear tree. The tradition of the arrival of the Panoians in Asia is recorded by Herodotus in one of his most picturesque passages in their return to Europe, and another not less so. The contact with Thrace had begun early, for Homer represents Priam as the head of an alliance of tribes combined in defense of Troy, but drawn from Europe as well as from Asia, the later settlement of Thenoi and Bithynioi. Whether it arose in connection with the Trarus or not was the continuation of an older practice. These tribes were able to remain between the river Parthenius and the Sea of Marmara because of the course of the invasion of Asia Minor now took another run. Two peoples who played a large part in Asia came in last, the Greeks, and much later the Gauls. It's clear that the coming of the Greeks into Asia did not take place along the whole of the western coast of Asia. At the same period, there is little doubt that the earliest stage was the migration of the Aeolians of northern Greece. Here legend seems to correspond well with what might be expected to be fact. From Iolcus went forth the expedition of Jason, which in itself was nothing at all surprising. Have to readjust again, sorry. I wish I had a quiet mouse. I know that must be annoying. Okay, it's merely the story of an early adventurer at sea, garnished with the myths of the Clashing Islands, Symplegades, and of the Golden Fleece and the magic of Medea in Colchis. From the northern area also came some of the most important chiefs of the two expeditions at Troy, Peleus and Laomedon, Achilles against Priam. The Pegasean Gulf is a natural starting point for sea rovers, and by Skyros, Imbros, and Lemnos, it was easy to descend upon the Asiatic coast. Later came the invasion of the Ionians of Attica, and especially of the Peloponnese into the parts of the Miletus and Ephesus. Much earlier than these, it may be conjectured, while the Arcadian stock had easy access to the sea, a colony set forth to Cyprus, which continued, down even to the 4th century BC, to write Greek in an Asiatic syllabary, volume 1, page 144. This island, far from the east, clearly lost touch to a large extent with the homeland of Greece, and surrounded by an indigenous and also a Phoenician population, preserved its language, as such colonies do in more primitive form than survive in its native country. Later still came the Dorians into Crete and into the southwestern corner of the Asiatic coast. See chapter 19. The most energetic of these peoples were the Ionians of Miletus. Their colonies, established solely for the interest of their trade, extended on the one side into the Black Sea and on the other into the delta of the Nile. Their influence spread north and south over their neighbors, so that Smyrna ceased to be Aeolian and Halicarnassus ceased to be Dorian. The Greeks have always been a seafaring and not an inland people, and hence it came about the area occupied by Greeks at the end of the 19th century AD was much the same as they were occupying in the 8th century BC. The Gaulish tribes repeat in the full light of this history that many other tribes must have done before history begins. Their earlier connections are set forth in the following chapter. They did not reach Asia until 278 BC. Their opportunity arose from family disputes among the princes of the Asiatic side of Hellespont and the Bosporus. They were in 3 divisions: the Tolistobogi, the Trochmi, and the Tectosagus. The princes of Asia regarded their raids with awe and horror, but every one of them was prepared to employ Gaulish mercenaries as fighters against some town or tribe which had incurred its enmity. After wandering to and fro, remember to and fro means going and coming, walking this way and going that way. Coming and returning, going and returning, to and fro. Gaulish mercenaries as fighters against some town or tribe which had incurred its enmity. After wandering to and fro for some time as raiders, these Gauls firmly established themselves in part of the great area which had once been Phrygia. They very soon adopted the worship of the earth goddess. The most characteristic cult in Asia Minor, a fetish stone of which was brought from Pessinus to Rome in 204 BC. With the cult, they adopted the foul rites which belonged to it, so that to later times the emasculated priests of the Great Mother were known as Gauls, Galli. With the kings of Pergamum and Gauls were never at peace, because the kings of Pergamum were not strong enough by themselves to reduce them to order. In the early part of the 2nd century, the Romans came into Asia, and with their coming, the doom of the Galtai was sealed. All right, that is the end of Chapter 1 of Ancient History, Volume 2, which, what was it called? Oh, The Peoples of Asia Minor. And the next chapter that we will do will be Chapter 2, which is called The Peoples of Europe. So that should be pretty interesting. Thank you, everyone who stayed and watched for the entire thing, and I will see you again. with Chapter 2. Goodbye.